abide by, whether or not you feel like into ezakwenzeka namhlanje, tomorrow, or next week, or 100 years from now. Estate planning is one of the most underutilized options of taking the headache away from other people.
Yes.
It's your
life.
It's your life, and it's ultimately, it's either all the great work you've done, but don't make all of that anybody else's problem.
Live it to the fullest.
Yes.
Live it even beyond living.
Have a presence.
Yes.
Legacy. You see, we get to use words like legacy. Legacy. And we mean this in the best way possible. And when it comes to estate, we're not just talking about what you leave behind for your family. We are also going a step further to say, let's educate you and the family on the fact that as sure as what's going to happen to all of us one day, that same estate that you leave behind, the receiver doesn't see it that in the same emotional loss way that your family might.
The receiver is emotionless.
The receiver doesn't have an investment in how you grew up, and all the smiles and memories, and it was so good, and I remember going to the Fufi slide. No, the receiver wasn't there. Wasn't there for that.
For that, he was there, but not for that.
Oh yeah, no, he was always there. Always there. Since the biblical days, the receiver's been around. Let's talk about estate tax, Faniswa. Let's find out what estate tax is in legal terminology.
All right. In legal terminology, estate duty is managed, or it's managed by the Estate Duty Act of 1955. So this is now when estate duty first came into play, about how many years ago? Almost 70 years ago.
So the receiver, only in 1955, was like, good telling that. Hold on. Hold on 1 minute.
So estate duty is levied on a person's net worth. So what you would do is you would collate all your assets minus all your liabilities. You get to your net worth, and then that is what estate duty is payable on the net worth. So what triggers estate duty is that when a person dies, obviously the assets that they leave behind get transferred to beneficiaries, either by way of a will, if there's a will in place, or if there's no will in place,
by natural progression.
By natural progression, which is interstate succession. There's a whole act on that as well. Who gets what benefit if there is no will in place?
Okay. Is that when they look for a spouse, and then they look for
children,
a family member, next of kin, then siblings, and okay.
Yeah. So either one of those will then trigger, or there will be that transfer of property to the beneficiaries, and then that will trigger then estate duty.
Okay.
The executor, which is nominated either on the will, if there's a will in place, or by the surviving family, is then responsible for wrapping up the affairs of the deceased. And the executor needs to collate proof of assets and proof of liabilities of the deceased, and then submit this to the master of the High Court, and then estate duty is then calculated.
Okay.
There is something called an abatement, which is deducted. So if you...
What is an abatement?
If you put together all of your assets and you minus all of your liabilities, you get your net worth. Then you minus this amount called an abatement, which currently stands at 3.5 million.
So is that a threshold?
It's in effect a threshold. So if your assets or your net worth is less than 3.5 million, in effect you don't pay estate duty, because your net worth minus this abatement of 3.5 million gives you your dutiable amount.
True.
And then on that we multiply by 20%, and then you get your estate duty amount. And then but that's 20% up to the value of 30 million. So if, let's make an example using numbers. We're
talking about the bag here, guys. We're just...
We're talking about
the bag. If your net worth is less than 3.5, don't worry, we're not really talking to you right now.
It's good to know.
It's good to know.
You've still got time to grow it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Listen.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a motivation.
Yeah.
You want to pay estate duty, just to flex. Just to flex after you're gone,
True.
Be like, tax it.
The people that actually go above that threshold don't want to pay tax. They set up all sorts of structures to avoid
trusts
and they donate assets and things. But
foundations.
The tax man always has a sneaky way of,
because he just goes to see where you started.
Yes,
like the paper trail is such a problem because you don't follow much. You just go. Okay, so
the 6 months ago.
Interesting.
So what made your father see the need to set up a trust?
3 trusts and a foundation. And an NPO.
Yes.
So you guys have suddenly become very community oriented here, I see.
In a very short space of time.
And transferred all your assets. Interesting.
So if we attach some numbers onto it, say you have a person who has a net worth of 50 million rand.
Right. Like Sabun Naso.
I'm in the presence of greatness. I must set up an NPO and you can transfer, so my middle name is Charity.
Oh, there we go. See? Natural NPO, it's already registered.
Yes. So we have an individual who has a net worth of 50 million.
Right.
What would happen is that you deduct this abatement of 3.5 million and you're left with an estate or a dutiable amount of 46.5 million. So the first 30 million of that is taxable at 20%. The balance is taxable at 25%.
Damn.
Yes. So then what a person can do, or before I get to that.
So this is like going into the pockets of a dead body.
Yes, not a pretty picture, but SARS is not pretty. SARS is not about looking cute.
No. Even if the money is dead, it's like, don't worry.
Yes.
Like she's a singing. And if you okay, I just want mine.
Yes, my bit. Just my bit.
Yeah.
So what would be included in a person's assets? So anything that you have a right to or a right in. So for example, if you own a piece of property, if you've got a right to a piece of property, that would be included. And property can be movable and immovable.
Okay.
So not just limited to your buildings or your houses, what we would think property is, but any immovable assets as well as your cars, your boats, your yachts, anything.
See, Sabun Naso.
Yes. And then also tangible assets as well as intangible assets as well. So things that you can touch and things like shares. And
intellectual property
and things that you can't really touch. There are specific inclusions which are included in property, which is any insurance or life insurance that was taken out on the life of the deceased is then included in that person's assets.
In the deceased
In the
assets?
deceased assets, yeah.
Why? If I took it out on your life and I was paying for it and it pays out to me so that I can bury you, how does that go in your net worth?
There's
a clause.
It's a clause, but there's a deduction that also matches that. Yes.
Okay.
And then any property which the deceased disposes of just before they die. So
what?
The receiver would look at the timing.
What's the time frame?
Yes.
Oh no! So I can't get rid of stuff before. But if I know. If I know it's 5-2.
Yes. So if you get like a diagnosis of cancer, you've got 3 months to live, and then you start selling off assets, then the receiver's like, oh, okay, no, we'll let you sell, because in any event you'll pay tax on the sale, and then they'll rope it back in when you die.
Oh, that's horrible. Your example just made it so much worse. Like, no, they'll let you back.
Yes.
Come back here. Bring me my money.
Yes.
Shoo.
So please don't, if you get like a diagnosis, you're about to die or you're about to take your life or whatever the case is, don't start.
Which you're not, by the way.
Yes.
Because wow.
I mean, people do it for so many different reasons.
Oh yeah.
There's a part of me that kind of understands people that do that.
No, look, it's you get the circumstances around it. It's just that every time it happens, you think, surely there was
someone you could talk to.
Oh, there was another way. But anyway.
So don't start selling off assets.
Yeah.
And then
it's a red flag.
It's a red flag, yes. So the deductions you're allowed to make, because you've got now all these assets that you've lined up, the deductions you're allowed to make are your deathbed or your funeral expenses. So if you had a long illness and you were in hospital for a long time, or you had the care of nurses,
or you're in a hospice or something.
Yes, those expenses you're allowed to deduct, as well as then your funeral expenses you're allowed to deduct. So you can have a lavish funeral.
Why?
To get the deduction, if it makes sense to you.
Is it still a deduction if you're dead?
Well, I mean, the people that are planning the funeral are the beneficiaries.
I'd rather leave them the bag. Wow, a lavish funeral. Okay, that's another thing. We'll have that's a topic for another day.
It is. Yeah.
Wow, like no. The opulence that I've seen at funerals, and the kind of a casket studded in Swarovski crystal. I'm like, oh sure. In 30 minutes time, that is gonna.
And 30 minutes after that, it's
oh gosh. Tax,
yes.
Focus, tax. Just now we're going to talk about grave robbers' taxes.
Yes. So the other deduction that you can get is any debts linked to your assets.
Yeah.
So if you've got property that was still under mortgage, you can get that mortgage deduction. Or if your cars were still financed, you deduct the loan amount away from the value of the asset. And then any liquidation or administration costs, because now you're going to have an executor who's going to wind up your estate. You might hire a lawyer to do that. Their fees and their admin costs, they're deductible. Any property bequeathed to a PBO or a public benefit organization or a municipality, you can get that as a deduction.
Makes sense.
And very interestingly, any accruals, or if you leave your whole entire estate to your surviving spouse. So if you've got a will drawn up and you say your entire estate, you leave it to your surviving spouse.
My surviving spouse takes control of everything.
Yes.
Yes. Who's out decide in a new will. Yeah, okay.
That's
how to move forward.
Yeah.
Because I won't be part of that anymore.
Yes. So then you've got your income, you've got your deductions, and then you minus your 3.5 abatement. Any amount left over gets taxed at 20% for the first 30 million, 25% for anything above that. The interesting thing about the donation or the accrual to the surviving spouse is the act actually says that because then you transfer all of your assets to your surviving spouse, you also then transfer the abatement to your surviving spouse. So when your surviving spouse eventually dies one day, they get the deduction of their 3.5 abatement.
And yours.
Yes.
So they need a bigger bag to get taxed.
Yes.
And yeah, if you're listening, darling.
Darling. Are you transferring all your assets to her?
I will leave only if you make sure you get taxed. Don't disappoint me like that.
Yes. But
Don't green us.
This has been subject to much debate over the years.
Yeah.
Remember, this act was drawn up in 1955.
Yes.
Where things like cohabiting and same-sex relationship were not really commonplace.
Well, they weren't legal.
They weren't.
They were very commonplace. They were very commonplace.
They weren't legal.
Yes.
So the definition of spouse in the Income Tax Act has actually been amended in the last, I think, 20 years.
To life partner.
To life partner. What is interesting, though, is it includes customary unions, religious unions, and same-sex and heterosexual unions intended to be permanent.
Polygamy.
That is now the interesting question, and this is now going to need a specialist who deals with estate duty, because I had a couple of questions as I was preparing that. In South Africa specifically, there are so many sort of different ways that people can enter into permanent unions.
I still want to know if polygamy is customary in South Africa, or if how many of my wives have a certificate from Home Affairs. You know what I mean? Because I don't know if it's accepted as a social, like as a step legally to say, because it's custom, but we can only per primary detainee, primary spouse give one corresponding marriage certificate.
I think that is the case. There can only be one corresponding marriage certificate. So I can't then want to take on a second husband and then
he also has a marriage certificate with you.
So the second partner would then be
customary.
Customary.
Got you.
But then there's all sorts of rules in place that remember when we enter,
and we'll get into that tax bracket as well.
Yes.
Of the customary side.
Because when we enter into that customary union, there are negotiations that take place between my uncles and his uncles or her uncles.
Yes.
And these things are documented. I've got a book where the Lobola meetings, my Lobola meetings were documented, that this is on this date we met, this is what we discussed, this is what we agreed on, and their signatures. So to prove a customary marriage, you provide these sort of minutes to these meetings, and there's
that there was indeed a meeting. The families did agree on certain terms.
Yes.
There was X amount paid. The subsequent amount or the balance was paid up at such a point.
Yes.
This and this was a gift, this and this was this, and the total was this.
And then in addition to that, once all parties are happy and everything is concluded, there is some form of celebration. It might not be at a church or at an event with a pastor and signatures exchanged, but there is some kind of celebration to mark the event, and photos are taken either by a professional photographer or people's cell phone footage, things like that.
Are those still photos, or is that just evidence? It depends on what your approach is.
Yes.
It depends on what you're after, girl.
It depends.
Depends on what you're after.
And then one last very interesting point on this, as I was doing my research, I came across some papers from the Davis Tax Committee. So Judge Dennis Davis forms a committee that advises the Minister of Finance on tax issues.
Okay.
And a point was raised in one of the reports that this transfer of the abatement to a surviving spouse, isn't it some form of discrimination against single people? Because if I'm a single person, not married, I'm not in a permanent union, I don't have a spouse, however you define it, to transfer my abatement to. So am I not disadvantaged in a way, and is it not discriminatory, and is it not against the Constitution?
Your first disadvantage is not having a spouse.
That is not a disadvantage.
In this context, in this context,
yes. And that is the question. Am I not being discriminated against for not having a spouse?
It depends.
Whoever's
voting on the legislation is more than likely going to side with the status quo.
Yes.
Strictly because it appeals to what they... It's going to be a difficult one to cross. But obviously we've got human rights expansions of and extensions of human rights from a very narrow to a much broader perspective now. So obviously we might joke, but it is something that is a serious question.
It is, and we need.
And what if I have no intention of ever getting married? That was never my thing.
Yeah.
But I would still like to transfer my assets in total.
Yeah.
To somebody and give them the benefit of also getting that abatement, my abatement. Or maybe shouldn't you just write in your will, I assign my abatement? Can't you?
I don't think that would work.
I think that should work. I think if the issue is about discrimination, then you should be able to assign your abatement. Like it should be your last little
gift.
There you go. Like. We gotta go.
Yeah.
Next week we're talking crypto tax.
Yes, we are.
Hectic. If you know anything about cryptocurrency, which we hope you do by now, because we do have House of Crypto as one of our partners here, you'll also know that the tax man isn't just looking and going, oh, Bitcoin, go ahead, do your thing. No, Ethereum, do your thing. He's like, children, welcome to my playground. I'd like to tell you how things work around here. I'd like to tell you how things work around here. Listen, you could have been anywhere between 9 and 12, but this is where you chose to be, and for that we are eternally grateful. Thank you for making Moment of Truth your 9 to 12 destination. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves so we can take care of each other. I leave you in the capable hands of Mono C. Much love, man. You guys take care of yourselves. The Phoenix and Swank London coming up now to do the invasion. Beway's on leave. Shout out to you, Lady P. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.
We are extraterrestrial. We are KMR.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's Nadia Nakai, and you're listening to Keeping Busy Radio, radio according to you.
Oh, honey. It's